Hello, everyone. On behalf of Transcelerate, let me welcome you to today's webinar on our Digital Data Flow Initiative, which aims to modernize clinical trials by enabling a digital workflow. On our agenda here, you'll see in the next hour, we're excited to share with you details of this project. After a brief welcome and orientation to the webinar, I'll hand it to our experts who will give you the background and overview of the project, describe the solution and technology, as well as the standards and our development approach. We will end with some more information on how you can continue to engage on this project and leave time for your questions. We do hope to answer as many of those questions as possible and ensure we have an engaging session. So first, I'll just cover a few ground rules which articulate the topics we cannot address. When asking a question, first of all, you do not have to identify what company you work for. We cannot address any questions around participation or usage of Transcelerate solutions. That's all voluntary, and compliance with the solutions is up to the adopter. A couple of topics we cannot address today would be specifics of vendors, CROs, sites, products, anything really that's outside of the scope of this project. We won't talk about individual companies' long-term development plans, costs, or what solutions are used by which Transcelerate member companies. But luckily that leaves us a lot of great things around digital data flow to talk about. I'll go over a few logistics for today's webinar. You've probably already noticed that participants are muted just for an ease of audio, but we do really want your questions. Feel free at any time during the webinar to enter them through the questions panel on your control panel. You can see the screenshot here, which highlights the questions pane. Simply type in your answer or your question and hit the send button. We'll queue these questions up for our experts at the end of their presentation. Okay, now we're going to start off with a brief poll. Your participation in this poll is absolutely voluntary, and all the results will be anonymous and displayed only as a percentage of all of respondents. We would like to understand, what is your current understanding of the Digital Data Flow Initiative? So you can see we have a continuum of knowledge of DDF. We'll tend to use the acronym DDF, so hopefully everyone knows that that stands for Digital Data Flow. But this will be helpful for our speakers to get some context of where you're coming from. All right, we're getting some great respondents here. I'm going to go ahead and close the poll and share our results. Okay, so we are all the way across, but probably more on the beginner side, which is great. So I think this webinar will be very informative for you all. I'd like to introduce our esteemed panel of speakers. These folks are all deeply engaged in the Digital Data Flow project. We'll hear from Bill Illis of Novartis, who is our DDF workstream lead. We're also honored to have Dave Evans, President and CEO of CDISC, one of our collaborating organizations. Next, we'll turn to Bob Hayden and Allison Lockman, both from Amgen, who are serving as co-delivery product owners. So they'll have some great detail about the project. Finally, Jacques Bursach, our product owner for our ecosystem team, joins us from Sanofi to facilitate and moderate the Q&A portion. With that out of the way, I'd like to hand it over to Bill to give us some foundational overview of the Digital Data Flow project. Bill?
Thanks, Stacy. Good morning, good afternoon, or possibly good evening, everyone. It's really fantastic to see the turnout today for our webinar and your interest in the Digital Data Flow project. And we do look forward to hearing your questions later in the session today, so please tee them up in the chat function as Stacy explained. My name is Bill Illis. I work at Novartis in our global drug development analytics line function, where I lead a team there working on our analytics platforms. But relevant to today, I'm the workstream lead for the Digital Data Flow project at Transcelerate. And I want to start off today with a few words about Transcelerate. Many of you are likely familiar with Transcelerate, but for those who may not be, just a brief introduction. Transcelerate is a nonprofit organization founded in 2012, so almost 10 years old now. comprised of 20 top global biopharma companies that collaborate on key challenges in the industry, really dedicated to help improve and advance the research and development of new therapies and medicines. There are about 30 active initiatives running in the Transcelerate portfolio, focused on collaborating across the drug development process and looking to improve the way we work in common ways. The primary goal is working together to define industry-wide solutions, and that's very much what we're talking about here today with the DDF project, and aiming to reduce fragmentation, eliminating redundant efforts, and eliminate solving the same problems 20 different ways, which we often do in our individual companies. The focus is really in Transcelerate is on innovation and the modernization of the R&D ecosystem, improving quality, enhancing regulatory compliance, in addition to the changes required to make an impact and drive value in usage. The emphasis is really on shifting from managing programs now of related initiatives to leveraging cross-initiative opportunities to accelerate delivery and maximize value. And that's very true with the Digital Data Flow Initiative, where in addition to our individual project, we're actively discussing and planning around the connections with other initiatives. The Clinical Constant and Reuse Initiative at Transcelerate, which some of you may be familiar with, and we'll talk about that later today, as well as the eSource Initiative and the Modernizing Clinical Trial Conduct and Real-World Data work streams. So we see a lot of linkages between the Digital Data Flow Initiative and the other projects in the Transcelerate portfolio. We go on to the next slide. So I want to kick off today really with some of the background or problem statement around the Digital Data Flow Initiative. And I think everybody probably has a recognition of this, but in clinical development related to systems and the exchange of usable data, there have been a number of efforts and initiatives over the years, both within individual companies, within pharma companies, within solution providers, and some notable cross-industry collaborations. But we continue today to face many challenges and inefficiencies. And in general, I would argue that biopharma lags behind other industries in the adoption of digital technologies. We do face many of the same challenges that the larger healthcare environment has faced. Highly manual processes, repeated entry of the same information into different isolated systems, the relatively long time lags between steps that goes with that, systems which frequently have inflexible and customized interfaces, so it's difficult to maintain a common exchange of data, systems that don't connect with each other or only do so with custom-built one-off integrations that are costly to implement and maintain. And as a result, too many processes rely on manual steps to interpret and move key information between systems, and also to extract and move unstructured data that's often locked up in documents and converted into structured, digitized, executable, machine-readable formats. And that's the essence of the problem we're trying to solve in digital data flow. In addition, the larger trends are also working against us in some ways. We've got the rise of digital endpoints, mobile health, digital devices, wearables, Internet of Things, all kinds of innovations that are happening in the digital data collection space. And these all create new requirements and new ways of running studies, new methods of collecting clinical data, and many new systems and technologies that are part of our study execution landscape. There are also increasing demands to connect with site-based EHR systems and to realize the benefits of eSource data acquisition. So starting from a foundation that I would argue is not very strong with regard to the ability to capture and use digitized data, and also not very strong with regard to exchanging data between systems, both within organizations and between organizations. At the same time, we're faced with more systems involved in the clinical development process and an increasingly complex landscape. And these systems now are often being stitched together with manual processes. So that's kind of the starting point for our Digital Data Flow Initiative. If we could move on to the next slide. The way we see it, we're very much on a journey here, a digital transformation journey. And the beginning or as-is state is a well-known document-based, unstructured content which defines and specifies a clinical study. Fragmented processes, repeated manual entry of information from a study protocol into multiple other systems and documents. leading, as I mentioned earlier, to long time lags and rework due to quality issues. The digital data flow workstream is really part of a journey towards effective reuse of study metadata, working to drive process automation and provide the foundation for further improvements and innovation. So we very much see our project as kind of an infrastructure element in the broadest sense to provide that overall foundation. The first step on this journey was actually Transcelerate's common protocol template, which some of you may be familiar with and hopefully using, and its technology-enabled eCPT version, which was developed over the last 5 or 6 years, and which has provided structured digitization to protocols in a document format. This has led to further document template-based solutions and functionality within the clinical template suite that's now available and supporting content reuse between study protocols, statistical analysis plans, and clinical study reports. In addition, the work on the common protocol template also triggered ICHM 11 to begin development of a protocol template and exchange specification. And that work is ongoing. And while the timelines are not perfectly synchronized with our project, we are working to stay aligned with that work as it progresses. Very much in parallel to those advances, starting in 2019, the DDF workstream was launched, and we spent about a year developing our solution framework and conceptual design document, which laid out an initial blueprint and was published about 2 years ago. That was followed by a hackathon event, which we held in the spring of 2020, which was targeted towards digital protocol authoring, or what we're calling study builder tools, to demonstrate the extent of protocol digitization and metadata reuse in quickly developed prototypes. Following that, last year we refined our vision, which has led to the announcement in early September of our collaboration with CDISC, Accenture, and Microsoft. And also to today, as we continue to seek to build out collaboration partnerships in order to develop the standards, build a solution, and demonstrate the end-to-end standards-based connectivity that we envision. You can move on to the next slide. So with DDF, we want to go further in moving away from a document-centric approach towards a fully digitized study protocol. This means structuring the executable study protocol and study definition data in a way that it can be used to automate configuration of systems used to execute studies. In this model, the protocol document becomes a report or output representation of the digital study definition, where the output document format is easy for people to read, while the same information, the digitized protocol, is used to automate the configuration of the relevant study execution systems and to drive additional innovations. Our aim is to transform the way we work in the industry with regard to study startup and the flow of digitized, machine-readable, executable study definition data. To do this, we'll create a new foundation, which includes the data standards and exchange standards, which will be developed by our partners in CDISC, plus a technical implementation of a solution that we call the Study Definitions Repository to realize and demonstrate those data flows. To catalyze the overall transformation, we plan to release this solution under an open source license that supports a number of different implementation options. And we also plan to engage relevant providers of systems and solutions that produce digitized study protocol and the systems that use or consume this information to build the connections to their products, including some of you in the audience today. Referring to analytics on this slide, having a repository of structured study definitions data creates new innovation opportunities to use analytical modeling and technology to drive insights and improve study designs. We won't be creating these analytics solutions specifically, but a result of our work will be the foundation or common infrastructure which enables these innovative capabilities to be developed and advanced by others. In the Digital Data Flow project, we've decided on 4 guiding principles, which you can see across the bottom of this slide. These really define how we are working in our project. We're developing and releasing a vendor-agnostic open source solution as the basis to catalyze and focus collaboration and innovation. By vendor agnostic here, we mean a design and implementation that does not intentionally favor one or a few solutions over any others. We're fundamentally aspiring to create a basis for industry-wide interoperability and seeking collaborators and partners who actively support that goal. We're also following an agile methodology for the technical solution development and to maintain alignment with data and exchange standards developed in parallel in a work stream led by CDISC. In this way, the technical development will be done in agile sprints using a draft standard, which will lead to feedback to the standards development team and a new draft version of the standards for use in subsequent sprints. Let me wrap up by talking about collaboration. You can move to the next slide. We can't create the kind of digital transformation we're talking about involving people, processes, data, and technology by working alone. None of us can do this by ourselves. And there is a saying that often gets repeated in Transcelerate leadership, which I think is very apt to us as well. And it goes, if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. And this sentiment is very relevant to our digital data flow initiative. We need all of us working together to really advance industry-wide solutions in this space. In September, we announced the kickoff of our development phase and our formal collaboration with CDISC, Accenture, and Microsoft to build out the core standards, the reference architecture, and a reference implementation. And you'll hear more about this ongoing work in a moment from Bob and Allison. In addition, last month, we concluded agreements with 3 additional software solution providers who develop and market systems which are part of our overall ecosystem of connecting systems, meaning systems that either produce or consume digital protocol data. Hold on to that thought for a few minutes as you'll learn more about the overall architecture later in this session. With that, I couldn't be more pleased that Dave Evans, President and CEO of CDISC, is with us today, and I'll invite him to say a few words. Dave has been a strong supporter of the DDF Initiative since he took up the leadership of CDISC nearly a year ago, and has been deeply involved in the preparatory work that brought us to the collaboration announcement. And he continues to provide advice and guidance, of course, on the standards development, but also on many other aspects of our work. So Dave, thanks for your commitment to our joint success, and over to you.
Thanks very much, Bill. It's a pleasure to be here and to be part of this community. Being in this industry for such a long time, I'm pleased to see that we're getting to the point where we are today. So CDISC, certainly you all know, it's a global nonprofit organization that we develop and advance standards within the clinical research space and also within the healthcare space. As part of this project, we're going to be developing the technical and the data standards that will be employed by the solution. That means that we're defining the specifications for the USDM model, the API specification, the controlled terminology, extensions from the CDISC control terminology, as well as conformance rules. So we'll be developing and then maintaining those standards going forward. Certainly by unifying all of these standards and developing the new standards, it provides a great point for this industry to live with the trial design and the study design, because then from there, everything else flows downstream. So we're very pleased to be a part of Transcelerate, the DDF project, and also with our other partners of Accenture and Microsoft. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Bob, and he's going to talk more about the technical architecture. Thanks.
Great. Thank you, Dave. Hi, everyone. My name is Bob Hayden. I'm an enterprise architect that works in the research and development informatics group at Amgen, and also the co-product owner for the delivery team here in the DDF Initiative. So what I'll do today is talk about the architecture and the technology. All right. So first, let's start with the problem. So what is study startup looking like today? And this slide is depicting a bit of the different variations and how things might work within the different organizations today. And so if you look at this, there's quite a bit depicted here, but looking at the legend, you can see that there is shapes which represent shapes depicting systems, vendors, different colors, and then you can see the processes, whether they're automated or manual with the solid and dashed lines. So looking at the top left, this is really the starting point that we are seeing in a lot of organizations, where you have a protocol used to manually configure the different systems. In many cases, these are downstream systems. So this is more of a protocol or a document-based model, and it can result in inconsistencies and also lengthy startup time, since there's a lot of manual transcription or trying to extract data from these documents and then automate it in systems. So generally, this is leading to those complexities. You can see in the top right and the lower left, these are examples of multi-vendor and partial integration, meaning that manual entry is still needed for some systems, and then there are integrations, but this is more of a proprietary, custom integration approach, where these are okay for a limited number of systems in many cases, but when you start to integrate with a lot of downstream systems that are typical when talking about study startup, you end up with more complexity. And then still there's, in many cases, manual steps that also, again, are have to be coordinated and can result in timing discrepancies. The lower right shows an approach where we could have a single vendor providing a whole solution. So in that model, you see that there is, there is automation, and that can be achieved, but then the trade-off here is typically reduced flexibility. So if you want to introduce a system from a different provider or build something unique, then now it needs to also end up with proprietary or point-to-point integrations. So this is the current state. And so within the DDF initiative, what we're proposing is a solution that allows for much greater flexibility and can achieve interoperability, even if the sponsor's networks is consisting of systems from multiple vendors. And so what that leads us to is this type of design, where instead of having these point-to-point connections, we have the central component here that sits between these upstream and downstream systems. And this provides a consistent way to connect the systems. So we're talking about consistent interfaces, a data model that in the center there that you see USDM, that stands for Unified Study Definition Model. And that's the data model that will be used to represent the study definitions. And then this, by having it in a consistent representation and managing the way that data gets distributed with systems, we remove those problems about timing uncertainties or data getting sent to systems before it's in an approved, confirmed, approved state. So this provides that additional consistency. This will be implemented using a reference implementation. This reference implementation will consist of study definitions and sit between these upstream and downstream systems. This implementation is going to be a functioning environment that showcases the associated clinical data standards, technical capabilities, and connectivity between these different clinical systems. As was mentioned earlier, CDISC is providing the collaboration to define that USDM, that data standard, as well as the reference architecture, which includes the API specifications. The study definition repository will be built with the help of Microsoft and Accenture to develop that SDR. And so this will be demonstrating connectivity to the various upstream and downstream systems, and it will be built with vendor-agnostic principles in mind. And this will be a foundation for all the digital protocol producing systems to send their structured data to downstream systems needed to execute clinical trials. The adoption of these standards and the SDR vendors will provide an easier and more reliable foundation to focus on. Instead of worrying about plumbing and connecting systems, they now have a foundation to build upon and provide valuable, innovative functionality. Let's go to the next slide. So the delivery approach, this will be to provide a MVP, a minimum viable product, consisting of the reference implementation. And what I wanted to do on this slide was talk a little bit more about what capabilities we're planning to provide in this reference implementation as part of this MVP scope. And this is still subject to change. As was mentioned earlier, the project started in September, so this is still potentially changing, but it gives you an idea of really what the focus is going to be for this MVP. So the main capabilities would be around creating the APIs with the appropriate operations to be able to exchange these elements with the SDR. So the whole set of APIs that fully represent the USDM, that's going to be a critical foundation for this MVP. The storage of the study definitions also as defined in the USDM. So we want to make sure that there's a complete way to represent all those elements in that USDM. There would be also a need for basic versioning support. So as study definitions are changing, these can be stored and can also be accessed according to what version is necessary for the state of the downstream process. And then there would be a study, some way to view the study history and the comparison between those different versions of those studies. So that would be the main capabilities to start. Again, focusing on the core storage and exchange of that study definition data. The SDR itself will be built, open source. There's no proprietary technology here. It will be deployed in a multi-environment infrastructure. So there'll be a development and like a pre-production environment, a test environment that will be made available to support different aspects of development, and also with the connecting systems that want to try out this SDR and the study definitions. It'll be provisioned using cloud deployment templates. So while the MVP needs to be very focused on a specific deployment on a cloud provider on Microsoft Azure, the intent here is to make this infrastructure as code so it can be adapted and deployed into other cloud or private hosting environments in the future. There'll be APIs and the backend application as needed for the business logic to process and store those definitions. There'll be a basic administration user interface to be able to manage the connectivity between the systems and do some of the functionality that I described earlier around viewing the versioning and the history. And then again, agile and open source. So it'll be deployed on GitHub, built using Azure DevOps, and fully open source and agile. And really the focus will be on the core storage of the study definitions and the connectivity. So we talk about this in terms of upstream and downstream systems. So upstream, typically referring to a study builder, the authoring aspect of creating the study definitions, and then downstream systems like EDC, CTMS, all the systems that you see to do study execution. And then the downstream collection of data. This is a critical aspect of this, is to be able to, with DDF and with this USDM data model, being able to automate the way that data is collected. So that's also an intent to show some of that during the MVP. Probably not the full data collection, but at least getting started there and showing how that is going to work in the future. All right, so hopefully that's helpful to give an overview. We can always follow up later if you have more questions about the technical stack or any of these capabilities. But now what I'd like to do is turn over to Allison to talk more about standards development.
Lovely, thank you very much, Bob. Good morning, good afternoon. Thank you for joining us today. My name's Alison Luckman. I'm a Development Operations Innovation Director with Amgen. And as Bob mentioned, and as Stacey mentioned earlier on, I am the co-lead for the delivery of the Digital Data Flow Initiative. So with that, I'm going to talk you through the standard setting and the work that we're doing around the Unified Study Definition Model, which we've heard about already from from Bill, Dave, and from Bob. There are 6 key themes for the Unified Study Definition Model, which is going to be referred to as the USDM. And we're trying to ensure that existing standards are going to be incorporated into the USDM where applicable. So the 6 key themes that we're focusing on are general study concepts, so things like phase, target population, and interventions. We're looking at study design, including indication, study type, arms, and epochs. The schedule of activities and assessments, workflow and eligibility criteria, transition rules and start and end points. Biomedical concepts, looking at assessment groups, usage rules, and observational concepts. And finally, data and data collection configuration, so questions, the code system, and the technology. And the next slide just serves to really show the complexity of the work that we're doing. So this, the information that you can see on this slide is not meant to be readable. It's a representation of the mind map that was created during the scoping phase of the work for the USDM. So it's super detailed and is really meant to explain and convey the complexity and the way that the content is organized and the way that the mapping of the fundamental aspects of the model is taking place. So your vision's fine, you're not supposed to be able to read it. There's just no really good way that we're able to show an image with readable details on a single slide. We can offer you more detail and insight on this, but this is really meant to be illustrative to give you that sense of the extent of the work that's being done and how detailed the reference architecture effort is. If you would like additional information, then please feel free to ask any questions that you might have in the questions panel. So to move to the reference architecture outputs, there are 6 of these. The USDM class diagram, as I've already mentioned. So the UML class diagram for the USDM, it functions as the study definition's logical data model. It depicts the classes and attributes that represent the data entities and the relationships between those entities that are needed to support a conformant study definitions application, from high-level study design elements, such as study phase and indication, as I mentioned earlier, to the detailed study design elements included in the schedule of activities and assessments. It includes a data dictionary that defines each of the classes and attributes to provide the semantics needed to implement the model consistently. And the purpose of the LDM is to provide guidance to the solution implementer. The next architecture output is the application programming interface specification, which we'll refer to as API. And that's a standard interface for a common set of core services that must be supported by all conformant solutions. So really it's a specification that enables the flow of data between the upstream systems that Bob was talking through and the SDR, and then the SDR and the downstream systems. The third output is the CDISC control terminology, and that's the new control terminology that's going to be needed to support the study definition LDM, and that's going to be added to the CDISC protocol terminology package. And that is going to include new code lists, new terms, as well as to changes to terms if they're identified as needed. The terminology for the CDISC SDTM trial design domains will also be covered by this project. The fourth output is the reference architecture conformance tests, and they're used to assert that any given study definition solution conforms to the DDF study definition reference architecture. And then the final 2 outputs are essential user stories, which are key to the agile methodology that's being utilized within the DDF project. And then also the architecture principles is the final output from the reference architecture work. So with that, I will just spend a little bit of time giving you some information around how you're able to engage with us in the DDF initiative. So the roadmap that we envisage for transformation for digital data flow, this is really what lies ahead of us. So as has already been mentioned, in September we announced our collaboration with Accenture, CDISC and Microsoft to jointly develop the open source vendor-agnostic DDF solution. The development work has commenced, and this will lead to the MVP, which is our next big milestone. And the keys to success post-MVP are going to be around engaging a growing number of vendors and systems, updating the USDM, adding in additional cloud deployment options, and establishing the long-term governance model. There's still planning being undertaken at the moment for those post-MVP releases. And we'd really love to engage and have collaboration from additional vendors, as well as those that have already been called out today. And the next couple of slides is really just going to highlight how you are able to engage with us in the DDF initiative. Okay, so first of all, there's an opportunity to be a volunteer working on DDF, but through CDISC. So there are opportunities available to become part of that CDISC DDF team, and those opportunities will allow you to get involved with reviewing the draft standards through the development of those standards, but then also in the public review later on in the process. And you're able to be a volunteer with the CDISC DDF team by navigating to the volunteer section of the website and following the process to be a volunteer. And the link is included there on the slide. There are other opportunities available, completely depending on your time availability. But if you complete the volunteer form with a description of your interest in the project, and CDISC will come back to you. And the next slide gives a little bit of information around how you're able to engage with the Transcelerate side of things for digital data flow. So we've included links on this slide to a variety of different materials that are available for you. We have the digital data flow website on the Transcelerate webpage. We also have the DDF launch press release, which I think Bill alluded to earlier. There's an area on the website as well with frequently asked questions, and additional information is available through there. And there's also the opportunity to engage with DDF via the DDF information form. So through that, you're able to sign up to learn more about DDF, and also for you to submit a request to participate in the initiative if that is what you would like to do. Okay, so with that, our final poll for this session, we'd really like to hear from you on what you would like to learn more about when it comes to the DDF solution. So this is going to be done in the same way as the slide and the polling that Stacey carried out earlier on in the webinar today. So either please vote. What would you like to learn more about? Standards, technology solution, business process impact, or open source community engagement? Also, if the topic that you'd like to learn more about is not available through the polling, then please feel free to enter it into the chat and we can call that out from there. So Stacey, excellent. Okay, lovely, thank you. Okay, so I can't at the moment see any other options being entered into the chat, but if you think of anything before the end of the webinar, then feel free to enter items into the chat as they come to mind. But again, we've got a bit of a mixture of response here. So topics that you would like to learn more about, in particular, the business process impact seems to be the most popular, a little bit more around the technology solution and the standards, and then towards the bottom of the list there, the open source community engagement. So thank you very much for your feedback. Certainly something for us to focus on as we continue to move forward with the DDF initiative and the information that we're sharing with you all. And with that, I'd like to hand over to Jacques, who's going to moderate our Q&A.
Thank you, Alison. We'll use the pool outcome for next communication. Hi, everybody. I'm Jacques Berset, working for Sanofi as Innovation Program Leader, and I am the DDF Ecosystem Product Owner. Today, I'll moderate the Q&A session with a great panelists, Bill, Dave, Alison, and Bob, you are now familiar with. I would like to remind you that this part of the webinar is not recorded. During